Georgia Hunter Bell just changed everything. How does a woman who spent 5 years away from professional running end up destroying a record that survived for more than 3 decades? That is the question British athletics is asking after Georgia Hunter Bell produced one of the most stunning 800-meter performances of her career at the Novuna UK Athletics Championships in Birmingham. She did not simply win another national title. She ran 1:55.93, broke Kelly Holmes' long-standing championship record from 1995, and turned what looked like a domestic final into a warning to the rest of Europe. For 31 years, that record had survived almost everything British middle-distance running could throw at it. Olympic cycles came and went, new stars arrived, and generations of athletes tried to move closer to Holmes' mark. Some came close enough to make the record feel vulnerable, but none actually removed it from the books. Then Hunter Bell arrived in Birmingham and made the old standard look like it belonged to a different era. The result mattered because of the number on the clock, but it mattered even more because of the woman who produced it. Georgia Hunter Bell was not always on a straight path toward records, medals, and major championship finals. A few years earlier, she was not living like a full-time professional athlete at all. She had stepped away from the sport, built a career in the cybersecurity and tech world, and looked as if athletics might remain only a past chapter of her life. That contrast is what makes this story so powerful. Most elite runners spend their 20s carefully building toward the moment when their bodies, confidence, and experience finally meet. Hunter Bell spent a large part of hers walking away from the things she once seemed born to do. Yet somehow, the athlete who left the track behind has returned as an Olympic medalist, a world indoor champion, and now the woman who erased one of the oldest championship records in British athletics. There was a time when Georgia Hunter Bell looked destined for a more traditional athletic rise. She earned a scholarship to the University of California, Berkeley, one of the most respected collegiate programs in the United States. The opportunity was enormous, and the talent was obvious, but talent alone does not protect an athlete from the pressure, injuries, and emotional fatigue that can slowly drain the joy out of competition. By the end of that stage of her career, the sport no longer felt the same. Injuries had accumulated, motivation had faded, and the daily rhythm of training and racing had become more difficult to sustain. Eventually, she made a decision that very few future Olympic medalists ever make. She walked away from competitive athletics completely and began building a different life back in Britain. Instead of preparing for championship seasons, Hunter Bell entered the professional world. Her work was connected to cybersecurity and technology, far away from the emotional intensity of international athletics. The routine was different, the pressure was different, and the goal was no longer to hit qualifying standards or chase medals. To most people around her, she looked like someone who had moved on from sport and chosen a stable future. From the outside, the story appeared finished because nobody was predicting that she would return to the track at world-class level. Nobody was talking about Olympic medals, British records, or championship finals. Nobody imagined that the woman working in the technology world would one day become one of the most dangerous middle-distance runners on the planet. At that point, Kelly Holmes' championship record was still standing quietly in the background, untouched and seemingly far removed from Hunter Bell's life. Then the pandemic changed the rhythm of ordinary life. Like millions of people searching for a reason to move, breathe, and clear their head, Hunter Bell started running again. At first, there was no dramatic plan behind it. There was no media attention, no elite comeback announcements, and no expectation that a few casual runs would eventually lead back to the highest level of the sport. Every Saturday, she began showing up at local parkrun events. These were not elite championships filled with agents, cameras, and national selectors. They were community runs, the kind of events where people of every level come together simply to move and compete with themselves. Yet week after week, Hunter Bell's times began to fall, and the competitive instinct she thought she had left behind started to return. Other runners noticed before she fully accepted what was happening. They could see that her speed was not ordinary and that her old ability had not disappeared completely. Several people encouraged her to reconnect with Trevor Painter, the coach who understood both her talent and what a serious comeback would demand. The idea was intimidating because 5 years away from the sport can feel like an entire lifetime in elite athletics. Eventually, she made the call, and that conversation changed the direction of her life. Painter did not tell her that she was too old, too far removed, or too late to return. Instead, he saw potential, but he also made the reality clear. If she wanted to come back, she could not treat it as a hobby or a side project. She had to commit fully. That choice was not simple. On one side stood stability, income, and the safety of a normal career. On the other side stood uncertainty, risk, and a sport she had already left once before. Hunter Bell had to decide whether she was willing to give up comfort for a dream that offered no guarantees. She chose the harder path and began rebuilding herself as an athlete. To many many observers, the decision would have looked irrational, because she would be racing women who had spent the previous years training full-time while she had been outside the system. The gap should have been too large, and the odds should have been against her. But Hunter Bell returned with maturity, perspective, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to actually want the sport again. What nobody realized at first was that she was entering one of the strongest training environments in British athletics. She joined Belgrave Harriers and worked with Trevor Painter and Jenny Meadows, two figures who understood what elite middle-distance running required. She also trained alongside Keely Hodgkinson, one of the biggest names in the sport. That environment forced Hunter Bell to raise her standard every single day. The lifestyle she had left behind returned in full force, but this time it carried a different meaning. Track sessions replaced office routines, recovery became part of the job again, and every workout became a test of whether the comeback was real. This version of Hunter Bell was not simply trying to recover an old identity. She was trying to build something stronger than the athlete she had been before. The first signs of that transformation appeared before she became a major track headline again. In 2023, she found another competitive outlet through duathlon and earned the chance to represent Great Britain. The details were less important than what the moment proved. After years away from elite sport, the engine was still there, and the British vest still meant something to her. That experience helped confirm that the comeback was not just a personal fitness project. It showed that Hunter Bell could compete again, handle pressure again, and place herself inside a performance environment again. The more she trained, the more her results improved. Slowly, the gap between an inspiring return and a genuine elite career began to disappear. Then came 2024, the season that changed how the entire sport viewed her. Until then, many people still framed her story around where she had been and how unlikely her return seemed. But elite athletics only celebrates comeback stories for so long. Eventually, an athlete has to prove that the story is not the most impressive thing about them. The biggest test came at the Paris Olympic Games in the women's 1,500 meters. Olympic finals do not reward sentiment, and they do not make space for athletes simply because their journeys are inspiring. They reward speed, courage, tactics, and the ability to stay calm when the strongest runners in the world are trying to break the field apart. Hunter Bell entered that final knowing she would need the race of her life to reach the podium. As the pace intensified, the field began to stretch and the pressure increased with every lap. Some athletes started losing contact, but Hunter Bell remained in the fight. She answered the moves around her, held her position when the race became brutal, and refused to fade when the medals started to take shape. By the time she crossed the finish line, she had done far more than complete a comeback. Her time of 3:52.61 delivered Olympic bronze and a British record in the 1,500 meters. No British woman had ever run faster outdoors at the distance. 5 years after stepping away from competitive running, Hunter Bell stood on an Olympic podium in Paris. At that moment, the conversation around her career changed completely. She was no longer just the former athlete who had returned from a normal job. She was no longer only a feel-good story about parkrun, second chances, and rediscovered talent. She had become one of the fastest middle-distance runners in the world. The comeback had produced something real, measurable, and impossible to dismiss. The momentum continued beyond Paris. Hunter Bell added another major international medal at the European Championships, further proving that her Olympic breakthrough was not a one-race miracle. Her performances were becoming consistent, and her confidence was growing with each major stage. The question was no longer whether she could get back to elite level. The question was how far she could go. Yet one achievement was still missing from the story. Hunter Bell had reached major podiums, broken national records, and established herself as one of Britain's leading middle-distance athletes. But she had not yet won a global title. That missing piece became even more powerful because of what had happened at the World Indoor Championships in Glasgow, where she finished 4th and left knowing she had been close to something bigger. 4th place can be a proud result at a world championship, but for Hunter Bell, it became fuel. She had been close enough to imagine the medal, close enough to feel the opportunity, and close enough for the disappointment to follow her into training. Every session afterward carried a new edge. She had rebuilt her career from almost nothing, but she still felt unfinished. By the start of 2026, Hunter Bell looked stronger and more complete than ever. She opened the indoor season with victories over 1,500 meters in Karlsruhe and Leavine, beating strong international fields and producing world-class performances. These were not not quiet wins hidden in the margins of the season. They were statements that the Olympic bronze medalist was still moving forward. The most important development was speed. Hunter Bell had already proved herself over 1,500 meters, but now she was showing that her range could stretch powerfully down to the 800. That versatility changed the way opponents had to think about her. A fast race suited her, a tactical race suited her, and a hard championship grind no longer seemed like a problem. In early March, she stepped down to the indoor 800 meters and ran 1:57.80 in Glasgow, showing that her shorter distance sharpness was becoming a serious weapon. That performance hinted at the same quality that would later explode outdoors in Birmingham. The woman who had already become one of the fastest British 1,500-meter runners in history was getting faster in the event where pure speed is punished and rewarded with equal cruelty. Everything seemed to be building toward the World Athletics Indoor Championships in Kujawi-Pomorze, Torun, Poland. Then illness disrupted her schedule and forced her to miss the British Indoor Championships. For an athlete preparing for a global event, that kind of interruption can create real uncertainty. Questions naturally followed her into the championship. Was she healthy? Had the timing been damaged? And could she still produce her best when it mattered? The answer came in the 1,500-meter final on March 22, 2026. Hunter Bell judged the race with control and patience, staying composed while others committed energy around her. When the decisive moment arrived, she moved with the confidence of an athlete who had learned from every previous disappointment. She crossed the line in 3:58.53, won her first global title, and set a British indoor record. That victory changed the meaning of her comeback again. Olympic bronze had proved she belonged with the world's best, but global gold proved she could beat them. The athlete who once stepped away from running had now reached the very top of the sport. For many people, that would have been the perfect ending to the story. But Hunter Bell's season was not finished, and neither was the larger arc of her comeback. Another record still waited in the background, one that had belonged to Kelly Holmes since 1995. It was not a world record or an Olympic record, but inside British athletics it carried real weight. It represented history, longevity, and the standard that generations of domestic champions had been unable to surpass. By the time Hunter Bell arrived at the Novuna UK Athletics Championships in Birmingham, expectations had changed completely. She was now an Olympic medalist, a world indoor champion, and one of the most in-form middle-distance runners in Europe. She was no longer entering races as an outsider with a fascinating story. She was entering them as one of the athletes everyone else had to measure themselves against. The 800-meter final carried pressure for exactly that reason. Hunter Bell was expected to win, but history has shown that expectations can be dangerous. Rivals study the favorites, the media watches every move, and every race becomes a test of whether the athlete can carry the weight of her new status. In Birmingham, she had to do more than run fast. She had to prove that her rise had reached another level. From the opening stages, she looked completely in control. She positioned herself near the front and settled into a rhythm that forced the rest of the field to work. There was no sign of panic, hesitation, or unnecessary movement. Every stride looked efficient, and every lap made it clearer that the field was gradually being pulled into a race it could not sustain. The separation came through pressure rather than one wild attack. Hunter Bell kept applying pace until the athletes around her started to drift away. What had begun as a national championship final slowly turned into a race against the clock. By the final stages, the question was no longer whether she would win, but whether she was about to reach a piece of British athletics history that had survived for 31 years. As she drove through the final straight, the performance still looked controlled. She crossed the line comfortably ahead, then waited for the scoreboard to confirm what the stadium had started to sense. The time appeared beside her name, 1:55.93. Kelly Holmes' championship record of 1:57.56 was gone, and Georgia Hunter Bell had not merely broken it, she had shattered it. The margin of victory showed how dominant the race had been. Issy Boffey finished second in 1:59.56, while Lucy Armitage ran a personal best of 2:45 to take bronze. Both athletes produced strong performances, but neither was close once Hunter Bell forced the race into her territory. This was not a title decided by a lean at the line. It was a demonstration of superiority from an athlete operating at a different level. After the race, Hunter Bell spoke with the calm of someone who had learned not to treat one performance as the end of the journey. She said it was really nice to get the championship record and admitted that she could not wait to be back in Birmingham for the Europeans. The quote was modest, but the implication was not. If this was her platform before the European Championships, then the rest of the field had been given a very clear warning. What makes the performance so meaningful is the full journey behind it. A few years earlier, Hunter Bell was not chasing Kelly Holmes, European titles, or global medals. She was building a career outside athletics and running again almost by accident. Parkrun led to a coach, the coach led to full commitment, and that commitment led to one of the fastest fastest and most unexpected rises in modern British middle distance running. That is why the record feels like more than a number. It is a symbol of everything that changed after Hunter Bell chose to come back. The office worker became an Olympian, the comeback athlete became a national record holder, and the national record holder became a world champion. Now she has added one of the most historic championship marks in British athletics to the list. Her story resonates because it is not built around one lucky race. It is built around a sequence of decisions that looked risky at the time and extraordinary in hindsight. She left security for uncertainty, returned to a sport that had once worn her down, and then climbed higher than she had ever climbed before. Every stage of the journey made the next one feel slightly less impossible. As the European Championships approach, Georgia Hunter Bell is no longer chasing the elite from behind. She is part of that elite, and her rivals know it. The woman who once disappeared from the sport has returned with medals, records, and the confidence of someone who has already rewritten her own career. If the last few years have proved anything, it is that the most dangerous athlete in the field is often the one everyone counted out long ago.